Howdy. I have my gigantic jug of water.
Outstanding. Hello and welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my co-host, Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today? Anthony, please. You heard me just a minute
I've been
ago.
wonderful every single day of my entire life, and I intend for that to continue.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. So, today we have a more serious discussion. What? Today we have a more serious discussion today. I linked you the video, and I've linked the video in the chat, and it's been in my mind ever since I saw it. A positive vision for the right. I'm discussing this, subtitling it "The Problem of Priests." The basic premise is that Academic Agent laid out a positive vision for the right in the sense of a quasi-utopian city-state. The city-state would be self-sufficient. It would have certain things I'm going to talk about in a bit. And it would be, and this is very important, against the globalist powers that are currently trying to destroy order and civilization as we know it, especially in the Christian sense of it. While there are criticisms that you can lay across every quasi or real utopian vision, I believe that there are a couple that really stand out against the rest. Namely, outside hostile force. Christendom was destroyed as much as by outside things, whatever you might name them to be, as it was its own corruption, its own failures to maintain the order. It's a half and half thing. We failed to maintain the order. The boomers gave up their inheritances. Name it, and it's a reason to have issues with it. Secondly, is that there is a spiritual need to Trumptonshire that must be addressed. And I mean this in very respectful terms, not, oh, you didn't mention God, therefore it's entirely wrong. I tried to do the SpongeBob meme there. I'll discuss the detractors from it later in the production, but I do not believe that anything in this is entirely unsalvageable. Hey, John Delaraz, we've made it, boys. And part of it, the reason why I consider this so important is that it is part of the language to create change within our movement. We cannot own the libs and consider it a victory anymore. In fact, anytime Ben Shapiro goes up on a stage and talks condescendingly to some idiot shitmonger liberal with pink hair and problem glasses, it's just par for course. You know, watching the controlled opposition monkey juggle the balls and hop around with a tin cup looking for donations is not something to celebrate. I, as a person going into his 32nd year, much like Julius Caesar and Alexander, when Julius Caesar sits at the statue of Alexander and considers his life up to that point versus Alexander's life, don't want to be, oh, look, we won another debate that honestly does not matter in the long term. I want to build things, and I want to join with people who are orderly and will build things. What did you think of the video?
I was impressed with the video. First off, I was impressed that he did the work.
Yes.
It was clearly something that he had sat down, actually thought about. I think that... So, keep in mind that I have family involved with local politics and whatever, so I understand the practical difficulties in getting even a small scale. This is, by the way, one genuine benefit to Academic Agent's video is that what he is putting out there as a possibility is probably more doable than most versions of these these semi quasi utopian or societal ideals. Like, for example, I know a gentleman, no, not in person, but no online. I know a gentleman who calls himself king, and is trying to start like a micro Catholic nation. And I actually don't dislike the guy. Like, he's a smart person. He was a U.S. vet. He knew what he was doing, but what he was doing was so, like, it would be decades before you would see anything even close to what he was trying to propose actually manifest in reality. What Academic Agent was proposing is something that is at least conceivable within the next 20 years, if enough people decide to put in the work. Of course, I know, as somebody who has seen what local politics look like, that even this version of it, actually making it happen, would be unbelievably difficult. Also, as we're going to discuss here, I do think that there was one major hole in it, and I understand why that hole exists. It was intentional on his part. It's not like it was entirely unaddressed. But I think that that's the crack in the wall, so to speak, that would make this society fall apart unless it's addressed. And that's where we come in.
Oh yeah.
Because we're that good.
Oh, absolutely.
I am only half kidding about that.
Walk
That is
on
where we
water.
come in.
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal is, not to damn Caesar's memory, but to bless him. Uh, Whatever the case is, no, I messed up that quote. I messed up that quote. Anyway,
I come to praise Caesar, not to bury him.
there we go. Thank you.
It's not hard.
It is hard.
My God, man.
All right. So what the focus of this live stream is going to be is to fix the hole that we see within his thought experiment, and it is a thought experiment. I am actually in the process of writing one that would be more American and more fitting to the American spirit, but I will discuss that in a bit. To the next slide, the mission statement that Academic Agent provided, and by the way, the link is in the doobly-doo and so on underneath the video. His mission statement was to build a self-sustaining local community with traditional values. It is, within its own right, a perfectly fine statement that I cannot pick a flaw with or a fight with. Can you?
No, I mean, that seems like a smart idea. Uh, as I think it over, if I were going to make a mission statement for a community, honestly, again, this goes back to what, and we're going to get there, so I don't want to jump the gun too much, but what we consider the fundamental flaw, I actually might make it more religious. Something like build a self-sustaining local community that glorifies God or something along those lines. But with traditional values is something that I could also, I don't actively disagree with.
Right. We can stand and defend this hill without having to say to qualify what we're talking about.
Correct, yes.
There's no debate that we can make about this that would not be petty or whatever. So the basic assumptions are some basical. Why did I write basical? The basic assumptions is number one,
I
community.
did not catch it either, so it's not just you.
I swear to goodness, I am smart. Okay, no, whatever. This is taking away from it. Hold on. All right. Number one, community is good. Number two, the local is greater or better than the national or the global. And I assume that Academic Agent meant the national and the global sense in the modern term, not the national in the sense of the tribe. Though, if he is listening, please correct me if I'm wrong. Third, sustainable is better than wasteful, and tradition is better than modern. I don't really have anything to say about these other than I fundamentally agree with them.
I mean, I agree with him as he elaborated on them in the video. Because like traditional is better than none of these, except I would argue, that community is good, really, and sustainable is better than wasteful. Like those two, I think, are pretty self-explanatory, and I doubt that you would even find even most leftists who would disagree. Traditional is better than modern, does need a little bit more qualification, and he does give that qualification in the video.
Mm-hmm.
Like in fact, he spends a lot of time on that point, which is good. He should.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, and I agree. As he elaborated on it, I agree with him. Like it's not about banning all new technologies and stopping all innovation in the arts and sciences, but rather about preserving older forms of organization, community, and community. So it really connects to community. uh, as for local being better than national global, again, I mean, this goes back to the Catholic principle of subsidiarity, which is a very ancient, I call it the Catholic principle, but you would probably agree and classify it as more like the general Christian principle because it's extremely ancient, goes back to the very early days of the church. Uh, so I think that most Christians would agree with the idea. Subsidiarity essentially says that if you could govern something on a lower level, you should. So,
Yep.
don't bring things. That's why Tolkien's idea of the ideal king was a person that you never met and barely knew about who collected taxes once every 5 years. Yeah,
Yeah, I can.
and kept invaders from burning down the Shire. Uh, like, and subsidiarity is kind of that principle in action. It is important to note that while Tolkien did envision his ideal government, and he recognized it too, by the way, as an ideal, as with a king, this does not necessarily need a king to work. You could have a subsidiarity with a republic. It would just need to be the same thing. Like, if it could be handled by the family handles it, and then you go up the ranks. Maybe the highest rank of government is, the city council or or Congress or the Supreme Court. Maybe it's the king. Either way, subsidiarity works. So local, higher, greater than national, global makes perfect sense.
So he also has two goals. Number one, to prevent nomadism, which is something I have personally been struggling with over the past 2 years, year and a half. And also to prevent social and technological changes that disrupt the structures of everyday life and destroy local communities. For the nomadism thing, one of the big things that isn't a secret here is that I have had an opportunity to go to Vietnam, and then I didn't have the opportunity, and then, the current events happened that continuously disrupt what I am trying to do for myself. However, recently I've come across quite a bit of literature that makes a very strong spiritual, philosophical, and even physical and mental point to remain within my culture, just change up my strategies. Ultimately, I would be an American in Vietnam, and even though I would not be a disruptive force, I would be more of a I would be closer to a virus rather than an actual citizen, which is not healthy for any sort of experience. Many people have said certain things about a certain 1960 something immigration act, uh, but honestly, it goes back further and it goes back deeper. The second that they were fine with the Hessians settling in certain areas, even if the Native Americans were violently disagreeing with them, the precedents were set. Do you have anything to say about nomadism yourself, Anthony?
Uh, Only that it was not a term that I knew until I watched the video, but once he described it, yes, I agree. Yeah, I think it's a good thing to prevent.
So,
And yeah, he mentions to prevent the social and technological changes that disrupt the structures of everyday life and destroy local communities. So this goes to, I remember Vox Day posted this link. It was, I believe, Tucker Carlson interviewing Ben Shapiro. And they asked and he said, this is the difference between a real nationalist and a fake nationalist like Shapiro. By the way, I don't even know if I'd necessarily agree with the precise terminology that Vox is using, but I agree completely with the spirit of what he's saying. And to explain what I mean, uh, what he was referring to was Ben Shapiro said something along the lines of, so, self driving cars are coming. Once they come, the trucking industry is going to be decimated. Would you ban self driving cars? And Ben Shapiro stated this as if it was like an obvious fact. Like, of course you wouldn't, right? And
Right.
Tucker Carlson said 100%, absolutely. I would ban them in a heartbeat. I would ban them right now. That would destroy an entire industry. How is that even a question? And Shapiro seemed to be at a loss for words at this point.
Yep.
Because to him, the idea that you could prevent a technology from disrupting a community had genuinely not occurred to him. Like, it was not really a possibility.
Yep.
So I it was a very interesting exchange that kind of gets to the heart of that. Technology is not a god. It is secondary to what you are doing in a community, and if it is hurting things, and then there is no reason to keep it.
Yep. And also, the problem with things like automation and whatnot is that it throttles, shall we say, the common man's ability to earn money. Domino's, and I work for Domino's. Just for a little spending cash, is trying to put out self driving cars. Trying to cheapen up their delivery stuff. But honestly, when it comes to those self driving cars, all I do is I see a free meal. Um, Ooh, here's a good one. Bradford Walker says, I have no issue with being skeptical of all the social and technological changes what promotes the fulfillment of localism, subsidiary, etc. Is good. What disrupts it is bad. They are tools. Yep. But basically, if you create a massive amount of people who previously had careers, had jobs, and by the way, truckers going out of business does not just affect truckers, it affects gas stations, it affects various shipping businesses. But you might say, oh, they can just load it up. If they're automating the trucks, they're automating the loaders, etc., etc. There is a whole big tree that will die with hundreds and maybe even a million plus people in it if automated trucking becomes a thing. Let's move on.
Yep.
Trumpton and England. In the example, academic agent outlines an ideal county that may be found in England. I will say that he said that the county would have about a low five figures worth of people and be a relatively small area. Large enough to be sufficient for farms, small enough not to be a power, is the vibe I got. Because he said that it was self sufficient, which is the first point. Also, I put in the county is satisfied. It knows its place and it is satisfied being there. The county does not have foes at its border. Like I said, one of the two big criticisms that could be levied at it is that outside forces seek to disrupt and corrupt the area. And even though he does have counters to it, which are, I think, pretty smart actually, compared to the different forces, and his answers, while to things like invasion are true, I'll talk about that in a bit. The county is under no threat whatsoever, and any threats that are potentially around it are answerable to the militia, uh, as well as the various soldiers and policemen who rally to the defense, in a fourth generational warfare style. Not that he said that, I am extrapolating from what he said. The county has no church except by the will of man, which is not necessarily something I fundamentally agree with, because of what we're going to be talking about today. The county's spiritual
Yeah,
needs.
that's the the biggest issue of that list. So, but we'll talk about it.
Yep, we're getting there. The county's spiritual needs are met. In other words, the baker is happy to be the baker, and he is, I'm not going to say sinless before God, but he is sinless before his community. Lastly, the county is balanced economically. There is no need, and any needs can be met as needed. We'll leave 4 alone. But essentially, this isn't actually very hard to meet as a basic premise for a county. And I'm calling it a county just because that's the term that feels more appropriate for a 3-town plus farms area. Because technically he had 3 towns in a sort of agreement with each other. No one's starving. Nobody needs to look outside the county for anything major or important. Again, no foes. The spiritual needs are met, the satisfaction, and there is no physical need either. That is, shall we say, extra to their daily life. So I have some notes about this. Unless you had something to say, Anthony.
No, I was just going to say I fundamentally agree with most of that, but we'll continue.
So notably, this is an English vision. It is not an American vision because the spirit is fundamentally English. These are people who live English lives, are descended purely from English stock, whether Norman or Saxon or Breton or Britain or anything else in that mix of Celts and Germans. They are of the English spirit and nature. Number 2, there are no needs for religion unless the people call for it, and they have to hit a majority, 65% of the population. Advancement is stymied. In other words, there is no technological development that is new or adopted or created within the town boundaries. As far as I can tell, I might have misheard that or misunderstood his intention. The world is moving on without them. Whatever they are within their town, the world exists and is doing the world's things.
Right. There are some similarities here to what some of the Catholic viewers may recognize the term the Benedict option. You might as well because it did get some play. Yeah, it did get some play in like the dissident right circles for a little bit. The Benedict option. It's not identical, but there are some similarities to the Benedict option. You could argue that this is a version of implementing the Benedict option. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, the Benedict option is, there's more to it, and I'm going to vastly oversimplify it, but the summary is that it means basically leaving society behind and like starting a community that you could preserve things in the middle of nowhere. I don't know if I don't think that was really his intention when talking about this. It was more, I think academic agent, and in fact, I think he said this. What he was doing is saying we always talk about, what is wrong with the world. Well, then what would the world that works correctly look like? Well, here is what I think it would look like. Yeah. And like I said, one of the benefits of it is that of the various utopian visions, this is one of the more practical of them, but it's still extremely impractical. Megabuster Shepherd says we'd have to find somewhere very remote, practically the middle of nowhere. In the United States, that is weirdly not as hard as you think.
Yep.
On the East Coast, it's impossible. The East Coast is entirely populated except for small enclaves of like forest land. But in the Midwest of the United States and the Pacific Northwest, and even some parts of the rural South, there are actually relatively large swaths of basically open land.
Yep.
This is overpopulation is not an issue, as anybody who knows anything about the world knows. Overpopulation was never an issue, and it was always a myth. Uh, so there is actually plenty of room to attempt something like this if one really wanted to, but would be very difficult.
Yep. Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma all have vast areas, though I wouldn't say that Oklahoma is fit for a truly self sufficient colony. However, Missouri just is, due to its incredibly fertile farmland. Arkansas, less so. Places like Colorado are not fit, but places like Montana, as well as for Minnesota and places of the Pacific Northwest, especially Idaho, just have that option. I would even say that Bertaria is a sort of more open model of this stuff.
I would also note, I want to note here that he never mentions anything about, trying to think of the word, he never mentions anything about cutting off all contact with the rest of the world. That was never a part of the plan. He never brings it up. He does not say no internet. In fact, he specifically says, we know that there are things that people in the modern world either can't or won't live without, and we need to account for that.
Yep.
And he's right. So that is another thing about his vision that I did appreciate. He didn't say anything crazy like, let's give up the internet. That's great. It might even be technically the correct thing to do, but you will not convince people of that. You just won't. So you might as well just plan that into, like, it's not a possibility.
But you can create strict porn, anime, etc. blocks. We might have to give up anime for this, Anthony. No more JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
No.
Yes.
No.
So, yes, and it's.
I've argued in sort of kind of in defense of anime before, but always on a very limited level of, like, it's not nearly as hard as people think to find anime that is not degenerate.
Right.
With that said, like, I know that there are jokes and memes about it, and I appreciate them, and I'm okay with making them. But when it gets right down to it, I can recommend to people plenty of things that are completely not degenerate, that are anime. With that said, if the community decided we're going to ban, foreign television, for example, I would be okay with that.
Yep.
I mean, I don't love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't love it. I would argue briefly against it, but if I was outvoted, I would shrug and move on. Yeah.
Right. And it's again, like, we actually only watch the wholesome anime. We don't watch the fan service shows. We don't watch the gamma self
Except Kill la Kill. Kill la Kill's great.
Kill la Kill's fantastic. The fan service is part of the metaphorical plot, but it's important something. Anyway,
I just thought of the Third Encounters meme of the gigantic board with all of the lines. It's like me explaining why Kill la Kill isn't degenerate.
Lastly,
but whatever.
Right. Lastly, imperial ambition and outside violence. Depending on the outside events that are going on concurrent to Trumpton Shire's founding, it might be that they might have to have a more hearty defense force than might be expected. Namely, banditry if we are experiencing a collapse, or even imperial ambition, that is, somebody conquering other nations. Let me see what the next slide is. Okay, the Detractors. I'll get to that in a second. But basically, China is not going to invade. Islam is not going to invade, at least in its present form. There is no leader to lead the masses out of whatever quote-unquote desert they're in. That's the method. Somebody shows up, unites the tribes and the rallies and the warriors and promises loot and booty, and he comes out of the desert like a hurricane. And the desert in this case is metaphorical. Tamerlane, Muhammad himself, the Umayyad Caliphates, the Ottoman Turks, the Seljuks, the Berbers, all of them follow the same hits. If Muslims were brewing to make war on the world, it is obvious, especially in the age of the internet, and you can tell when it's going to happen. Like, I know that sounds weird, but ISIS was inevitable, even without the CIA pumping them up with the cars and stuff like that. Anyway, so it's it's one of those things where this is absent in this community. Let's see here. Bradford Walker says no such community should blind itself to the world outside. You need to know what's going on, prevent what's being conquered from without, and gatekeep bad means that can prompt entryism from within. Yes. In the example that I'm brewing up, and I'm being very careful with this, I would say that for every 20,000 people, 5,000 people are fit to fight. That isn't saying that they have 5,000 soldiers, just that there are potentially 5,000 people fit to fight within every 20,000 people. And to say one.
I will also note here that that number is low.
Yes.
And the reason that I say this is that it's normal, but if you need to fight, that number can be a lot higher. And
Yep.
we know this from real historical examples. Specifically, I'm thinking of Paraguay in the famous five-way war with like Argentina, Chile, and whatever. I forget the other countries. But basically, it was horrendously badly outnumbered. And it lasted they lost eventually, but they lasted for years. Ended up literally all of the men died, I'm pretty sure, except for like less than 10% or something. Almost all of the men died. Like the women started fighting. They had over half of their country out actually fighting this war and holding off a combined alliance for many, many years. So if you need to, you can absolutely militia. I don't even know what the word would be. Militiaize, weaponize more of your society for defense purposes, if need be.
Right. And like we're not getting very complicated with this. We could get complicated with it. That's not the purpose of this stream.
Also, complications are bad. Bureaucracy is bad. Keep things as simple as possible and figure them out when problems arise.
Yep. So I watched and looked into a lot of how the detractors are taking to Trumpton. Keep in mind that for some strange reason, a lot of people are attacking it. And there are 7 reasons why they tend to attack it. First off, and the most prevalent one, is the worship of mammon. Essentially, people want their lines to grow forever. They want to be that Sigma billionaire with the Porsches and with the luxuries and so on. And they say to themselves, when have you ever seen somebody unhappy on a jet ski? These people are not for civilization. I say this as somebody who has worked and seen die, though I heard of it rather than watched him breathe his last. An actual incredibly wealthy man who probably had control of over billions of dollars in assets. It's if you included everything he had influenced, not his actual cash money. Because I don't really understand the whole wealth thing, because sometimes it counts stock, sometimes. Anyway, point is that he was an incredibly wealthy man. He died insane inside of a madhouse, because he was too. Yes, there is symbolism, Bradford. The second I hit 7, I'm like, that's it, I'm done. He died insane. Like, if you want to follow in his footsteps, where he betrayed even his own pastor and his pastor's son and cheated them of their wages or brought them to court, hey, you can follow those footsteps, but don't bring that on me. And honestly, the worship of mammon is probably one of the biggest right-wing flaws we have right now. Let's be real. My law of personal no brother wars against Catholics and Orthodox stands, and it stands forever. But people are willing to destroy themselves, destroy their friends, ruin alliances, ruin friendships, ruin streams over the worship of mammon. And it's not even good argumentation. It's literally, but what about me sitting in a hot tub with a Mercedes in my garage? And I'm exaggerating that, but they talk like that. Next is the death cult. We have people here who call themselves Christians, but really worship themselves, worship the world, and do not want to separate from it. And what they do is they go, "Oh, academic agent, you didn't mention God, and you didn't mention England, therefore you're wrong." In almost this exact form of voice. It's very gamma. It is incredibly gamma. I hate it. I couldn't even listen to all of it. It's very selfish. It's this idea that whatever good Trumpton Shire could have, what this vision could have, is meaningless because the right words weren't said and the right global how do I want to say it? The right global catchphrases weren't used. This is not a global thing, and the language that is used to describe it should not be global either. Pop cult, banning anime, but also banning things like Marvel movies, banning Hollywood, banning the certain group of related people who happen to own all the entertainment industries. But I would never actually believe in what I just said. Oh no. Banning that stuff. Like, that's actually part of the hostile forces. Hollywood, even if it is meaningless to sell their videos there, will go to sell videos and introduce pornography to the thing. Which leads us into number 4, Coomers. How dare you ban free trade in pornography? How dare you interfere with my sexual mores? The thing that destroyed the atheist community was not their pathetic argumentation that wouldn't stop even a normal man of God. It was the fact that they were all obsessed with cooming and sexually abused people.
Mm-hmm.
Among other things.
So the new atheist movement was big when and I promise I won't distract you for long. This is short, but the new atheist movement was big when I was in high school, and sort of had an effect on me in high school to it made me stop, and it actually they basically drove me to read Dr. Fesser. However, looking at the state of the new atheist movement since that time has really made me go, dodged a bullet there.
Right. And even though I do harbor most of the dysgenic forces for, atheism, which is, various, anyway, it doesn't matter. I am fortunate not to have fallen into that myself as well. Honestly, they were disgusting, and their argumentation was terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
didn't so much as fall into it as in high school. I was a high school student who, I didn't really know any argumentation, and they were the first people who were even trying to make any sort of, and I know now that they're not good, but serious argument against God and religion, and nobody really knew how to answer them because, honestly, the arguments were so bad that there was really no body of literature that was arguing against them. But then, that's when I found Dr. Fesser and I learned there was a body of literature. The thing is that he kind of had to write it.
yep.
But it was all, in a way, it was really a great thing because it was like a back to basics almost. It's just these are making such basic errors that the fact that they convince anybody at all shows that, people just don't know what's going on. He was absolutely correct. And in a weird way, I'm kind of grateful to the new atheist movement for that. They drove me to God.
Yep. Which is, praise the Lord. Yep, I'm going to make the argument that coom equals atheism. But finally,
Yes.
the biggest core here is that they would prefer their degeneracy over purity, harmony, tradition, and order. Which, honestly, speaking as a man who tasted the barest taste of it before 9/11, is absolutely something necessary. Next is man's fallen nature. This covers a lot of things, but essentially, man as a fallen beast will ultimately devolve to chaos unless there is something that he has adopted within himself or is given to him by God to create order, tradition, care for the families, and so on and so forth.
Right. So if you want to give a real criticism of Trumptonshire that I sort of agree with, but not really, and I'll explain what I mean, it's that Trumptonshire absolutely 100% will not last. It can't. It's an earthly institution. It will die.
But even
But
I'm sorry.
but that does not mean that it's not worth doing.
Absolutely. This is worth doing. Found fundamentally, even just to discuss it is important. Number 6 is man needs absolution for sin. This one is a fairly okay argument compared to the rest, but essentially, sinful man on earth is in discord with God until he accepts the blood of Christ. Therefore, there would have to be a church of some kind within Trumpton that is in tune with the spiritual needs of the people. And by that, I mean they are Christian of some denomination, doesn't matter what. As long as it's godly and true and not heretical. I'm looking at you, Mormons. Actually, you could make an argument that Trumptonshire has been Mormons on and off. Anyway.
The Mormons, yeah. Here's the thing, Vox Day. I know I bring up Vox Day a lot here, but I bring him up a lot because he has covered a lot of this stuff using slightly different language, maybe than I would, but I think on the right track. And he pointed out that the Amish, who I don't agree with on many fundamental points, will probably do well in the coming collapse because they are essentially a cult. I mean, much like the Mormons, their cult has done a very good job of pretending not to be a cult, though not quite as good as the Mormons have. The Mormons make people think that they're almost normal. Megabuster Shepherd says, "Let's not throw shade at Mormons." They sort of deserve it and sort of don't. They're not. The best I can say about the Mormons is that I don't think that they're actively my enemy.
Right.
They're
not actively malicious. I've been to
that isn't. Honestly, that's a very low bar, though, so I don't know if that's enough for me to say, they're not worthy of criticism at all. I also don't think that they're going to be part of the plan for the future. They are a cult. If you dig into Mormonism, they don't seem like a cult, and there are Mormons who are not part of the cult, but if you are a devout Mormon, like you are really into the religion, you are a part of a cult.
Yes.
Mitt Romney was not. Mitt Romney was not a real Mormon. He was, he was a cultural Mormon.
Yep. And it's
like he just grew up in that area. He went to whatever Mormon church every Sunday, but he wasn't really like a big member of the religion, at least to my understanding. I mean, there's always the possibility that he was part of like the Mormon cult, but he didn't strike me that way.
Right. He was a politician, and he used various things to look good. Much like Mike Pence, much like other people who Mike, John McCain, and so on and so forth.
Much like Joe Biden.
Joe Biden.
Yeah.
So lastly, the biggest thing I've seen in the detractors is that they are personally dissatisfied with their lives IRL. And how do I want to put it? They're taking it out on the idea that life could be better. I don't really know where I can go with this because this is a very gamma thing to do, to destroy what others are talking about or trying to create without, building.
Yeah, it's not a serious objection.
It's not an objection. It's more about like the character of the detraction is what I'm discussing. Like it's not like it's like I'm unhappy, so I have to tear at this.
So, man needs absolution for sin is actually one that I sort of agree with, and I know that you do too, and that's what we're about to get to, I think.
Yep.
That's really, I think, the only one worth discussing. The others are all various flavors of emotion or cope.
Yep.
Either I want to coom, I want to be, or I want money, or I am unhappy and I don't like imagining a world that's better. Those are all really not worthy of response. However, the idea that there is something genuinely missing from this community is worthy of at least response.
Yep.
So let's discuss that.
So, whatever systems that academic agent put up within um, Trumptonshire for the 65% vote for religion and so on and so forth, I would argue, I would die on the hill that there cannot be an atheistic community within Trumptonshire's model. You might
No.
have a poly model of Christians, specifically Christians, where it says, we shall have, 3 Baptist churches, 1 Catholic cathedral, and 2 smaller parishes, and we shall have 1 Orthodox church for the 20 odd people who are Orthodox.
I agree. I think such a model could work, but I honestly think it would be even better if you just separated out even the Christian religions to towns, because right now the Christians can get along.
Yep.
And they should get along. But as soon as we don't have outside forces besieging us, and I say this from a historical analysis perspective, it will not last.
Yep.
And it might just be better to not force puzzle pieces together that don't fit.
Yep. And look at Ireland. Anytime they weren't fighting the English, they were fighting each other along religious lines, and that's just the basics. Let's see here. So here's my points of the need for priests in a generic sense. I am in the Christian mode because that is the best way to describe this stuff. But it is beyond the Christian ideas. It is entirely, shall we say, even if Christ did not die on the cross, there would still be a need for the office of priest towards God Almighty. Okay, go for it.
What I was going to say is, when you're talking about these sorts of communities, I would tend to agree, I believe, with C.S. Lewis. Back in my, high school, first started reading the New Atheist and getting kind of worried about it days. I looked into Buddhism as well, which is something that atheists flirt with, atheists who admire Buddhism are dumb. I mean this fondly. Sorry, atheists. Because Buddhism is an incredibly strict religion when understood properly. And I would tend to agree with C.S. Lewis that if Christ had not come down and then died and then resurrected, Buddhism would be what was most likely to be true. I have great respect for Buddhism and Buddhist teachings. What I'm trying to say is, if you're going to found a community like this, I think the ones with the best chance of surviving long term in a healthy way are Christian and Buddhist.
Yep.
Specifically Buddhist.
Buddhism is...
other communities can do it, but I think they would look a... Yeah, other like Hinduism, which is a pagan religion. I am not an admirer of Hinduism. I'm very openly, apologies to any Hindus who might be listening. I'm sure that you could defend your religion, very well, if you wanted to. But to my understanding of it, Hinduism is a very mean religion.
Yes.
It is a pagan holdover that has somehow made it into the modern day, with all of the flaws of the old pagan religions, but without the overt violence, because the British stamped it out. And make no mistake, that's one thing that the British absolutely deserve credit for. They stamped out the extreme violence of the Hindu religion. There were Hindu golden ages, just as there were Muslim golden ages, and there were Buddhist golden ages, and there were even Mesoamerican pagan golden ages. The Mayans specifically. I was going to say Aztec, but that's actually not true.
you know,
Uh,
they had their golden ages.
I think, though, that those communities, if they were to found themselves, would look a lot more like old pagan communities, and with all of those flaws. But a Buddhist community would look a lot more like something we moderns would find palatable.
Yes. So,
And Megabuster Shepard said there is still overt violence just against Christians and Muslims. Yes, but not. It is no longer sanctioned, is what I'm trying to say. Like, it's at the very least, and this is a small comfort, unofficial. If that makes sense.
it's still
Like
savage.
in ye
We'll move
olden
on from
days,
this. Hold on.
but
Let's just move on from this.
yeah, in ye olden days.
Sure.
Okay,
Yes. Anyway,
for another time.
for another time. I've got my own stories I could tell about that. We're not. It's out of bounds of what we're talking about today. To go into such detail.
That's fair.
So the need for priests. Priests have many different forms and functions within the community, but apart from, like, say, the journalist version of a priest, or somebody who is spiritual in different ways, a priest does these 8 things. A priest calms and cures spiritual disease. A man suffering from um, say, demonic possession or influence, rather, or from a sin like pornography, has as much a spiritual problem as he has a dopamine addiction. 2, priests are a bellwether for social and spiritual problems. It is no coincidence that men like Joel Osteen, Creflo Dollar, Popov, and all these other guys showed up in the time they did during the crisis of the 1970s. Spiritual crisis. Number 3, right from wrong must be clearly defined by learned men who will not deviate. And I imply from heterodox, from the proper opinions directly from the Bible. In other words, if there is an impurity, they can recognize it and deal with it. I am fortunate that in my church I have a cadre of such men, and I hope to step into their shoes, even if not in this church, in some other time, provided that I am married and have kids, or there is a perfectly good reason as to why I do not have kids. Namely, we got nuked, and the nuclear wasteland is happening. Number 4, sin must be answered for by leaders who understand it. If there is a sin within the community, to let it fester will destroy Trumptonshire. It is not about some sort of, like, purity spiral. It is about saying, dude, we just walked into the biggest orgy pile this side of Miami. What is wrong with you people? This is wrong. For example, if there are many bastards in a community, it creates social disharmony, just as an example. Number 6, Satan is an invading force that will seek to destroy, corrupt, or turn chaotic, whatever he can do, a place like Trumptonshire. Not because it's a threat to him, but because it is pleasing to God to be orderly, family focused, and not violent or disruptive or whatever to your fellow man. They can answer number 7, why is X good, but Y bad? So, in other words, why is purity towards your wife good, but sexual impurity bad? That might sound strange. It's obvious, it's obvious even from a non-Christian standpoint. However, if there is no one to say you are wrong for, cheating on your husband, cheating on your wife, or being a bigamist, or being a whatever the term is for a woman with many husbands, reverse bigamist, so on and so forth. They must be the the guardians of the moral order. There we go. I should have put that in somewhere. Guardians of the moral order. If the moral order is corrupted, Trumptonshire is also corrupted. 8. Man needs a standard by which he may practically see his relationship with God modeled. When I look at my pastor, he's a little normie, he's a little blue-pilled on certain things, but he has a family. He is the master of his house. His children are beginning to get married, and they are having children. He will be swimming in grandkids very soon indeed. If men look to their pastor, priest, whatever, and see a man who is an alcoholic, a man who is struggling with, various sins, but instead of fighting it legitimately, he is refusing to do anything about it. If, the XYZ is a pedophile, if XYZ is somebody who beats his wife, it doesn't matter what the contagion is. Somebody who is unwilling to deal with the sin in their personal life is unwilling to deal with the sin in other people's personal life, except to give them power over them. Anthony, what are your comments about this list? Or if you'd like me to go into detail into one or another. Oh no. Oh no. Did I lose him?
Spiritual level as a Catholic,
Hold on. For some reason, you disconnected and came back in. Could you start back to where you began?
Okay. So I think the list is a good one. Your idea of the need for priests. One thing that I will say is that from the perspective of a Catholic, we would also say that the sacraments are absolutely critical to a community and are needed. You could possibly put that on this list somehow as people who are, a way to see his relationship with God modeled. Yeah, I would agree with that. You could possibly say that is where, I'm trying to think of how to word this. That is where you would fit that in.
Yeah.
And I could agree with that. The Protestants, even though they don't have all of the sacraments, and I don't even mean this from the Catholic perspective. I mean from the Protestant perspective. You don't want all the sacraments. Yeah. Even though you don't have all the sacraments, the basic idea of the relationship that we have with God needs to be seen on a practical level as important for priests. So my issue with Trumptonshire generally, as we talk about the need for priests here, it's something that's actually not even mentioned here. You talk about the importance of priests, and you are absolutely right, but there is another reason that I was thinking of, and that is, you want me to wait?
Lay it on me, I said.
Oh. The other reason that I was thinking of isn't really directly connected to the need for priests in terms of what priests can do for themselves, but that man will always have a religion. Brian Niemeyer talks about this, does great work with it. Currently, the religion of the United States is not official, but it is the death cult.
Yes.
And as recently as 2011, in Obama's Congress, the U.S. Congress voted to make "In God We Trust" the official motto of the United States. You probably did not know that because almost nobody does. But look that up. It is true. Mm-hmm. It's the actual official motto, and it was voted in Obama's Congress. And I would argue that as recently as 2011, the official religion of the United States was not the death cult. As of right now, it is. It's not official in that it's not officially stated, but it's official in that in high positions, that is what the policy of the government in practical terms actually is and is trying to be. If there are no priests in Trumptonshire, or if there are no priests, if there is no religion in Trumptonshire, there will be a religion in Trumptonshire. There always is.
Yes.
That's just how it works. And if you don't specifically state that you have a specific religion in mind, then secularism becomes the religion, specifically the secular death cult, and it worms its way into everything. Until you say no, abortion, for example, is wrong because, we're all made in the image of God. Well, then, being made in the image of God isn't on the Trumptonshire docket. It's not written in the bylaws. So, what? How do you decide that question?
Right.
Like, if being in the image of God, being made in the image of God, needs to be in the bylaws.
Yes.
Is kind of what I'm trying to say. That specifically Hindu, this goes back. I promise I won't dwell on it, but this goes back to the religions like Hinduism, where that isn't actually the case, at least not directly. And there are people who are made lesser or greater, which isn't something that is entirely absent in Christianity.
Yep.
Megabuster Shepard says low tech is the way to go, but counter argument. That's how I got cut off. Perhaps we need high tech now. I get your point.
I need you to materialize within my astral plane server. So to jump off what you're saying, which is absolutely right, to jump off to the next point, which is the need for religion. Man's need, and unless you have something more to say.
No, this is close to what I was getting at. So basically, you were going to get to it anyway, but you just made it into its own list.
So, first off, one, man's need for religion is ingrained as deep as his need for human companionship. However, a man can live alone, but he cannot live without a god. Two, a courageous man must strike back at evil, but intangible evil cannot be slain as, say, a murderer can after the evil is done. While the evils of porn and other such things are acknowledged, when looking out, evil as in out into the world, evil must be clearly defined. In other words, there must be a tradition of why Trumptonshire is the way it is, and it must be curated by this priest class. 4. Religion causes courage within the hearts of men. In other words, if some charlatan finds a gap in the defenses and tries an exploit, a normal man, a good Christian gentleman, can rebuke him and say, "You are lying to me, to these people. You need to leave." I've sent my son for the constable. Religion guides the art. Religion guides art, and it guides the muse. My writing is inspired by the muse. What is the movement of the Holy Spirit? When I sometimes when I sit down to write, I do not mean to put anything spiritual into my work. However, something happens and it becomes sublime. I do not understand it. I merely accept it and work with it. Uh, Billy won't have time to look at his dirty picture collection when he gets sent to the cornfields. Yes. 6. It promotes families above personal gain. If the be-all, end-all is the God of mammon instead of the God of order, our God, Yahweh, God Almighty, Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our sins and was resurrected the third day, versus a God who would cheat a poor man of $1,500 of wages that he was earned. There's no contest. There's no moral high ground you can take. Oh, well, he kept this money, this wages, etc., etc., and his riches were increased. But when he died, he did not have his family around him, and his family tore him and his legacies apart. That is the contrast between God of Mammon and God Almighty. So we've already talked about number one, especially you, Anthony, with some really great pieces. Do you have anything else to say about these five others?
I think it guides art and the muse is an interesting one, but it's also, first off, as you have said, and I linked to you an article on this, a very good article by from the blog Brenemrys. It's called Branemrys. Uh, I forget the name of the writer. It might be Brandon Watson, but don't quote me on that name. He's a college professor. There's really nothing to him except I like his except that I like his stuff. He wrote a really great article where he said basically, I absolutely believe in the muse, and I think that it is, and I believe it for like entirely logical reasons. Like we have very good reason to think that the muse actually exists because its existence is attested to by like practically all of literature, all the way up to literally the earliest works of, man, back
Yep.
to the Iliad opens up with an invocation to the goddess. Depending on the translation, it might even be an invocation to the muse. Uh, sing muse of the rage of Achilles, right?
Yep.
So I think that that's a really interesting point to make, that the religion guides art and guides the muse. It's not more than just like religious people will write according to their beliefs. It's something that is literally a part of the history of almost all literature.
Yep.
Like it points up from something divine.
Yep. The Bradford Walker
That's a
says
really good comment.
Bradford Walker says a useful religion has to institutionalize the raising of boys into men, girls into women, and train them into their roles as adults working within the whole of an extended family.
That's a
Absolutely.
good point, and it fits within the Trumptonshire framework as well, which is about, you know, kind of about making people, getting people set in their roles,
Yep.
if that makes sense. So, if there is something about Trumptonshire that I think can definitely turn people off, it's this idea of stay in your lane, right?
Right.
Like, and I could see why that would bother people. But at the same time, it's a utopia that's not utopian, which is what I like about it. Like,
Right. It's not
you know,
some weird excuse for a
this,
sex paradise.
yes, you're expected to be happy being the milkman. He uses that example, academic agent uses that example very specifically, I am sure.
He did. Yes.
Something as mundane as the milkman. You are meant to be happy being the milkman, and you are to make yourself happy being the milkman, because being the milkman is what you do. It is an important role, and it's something that you can find value in. So I think there is something that's definitely, it's not so much that you can't do anything else, but that it's an understanding that your role has value and gives you, and it has meaning.
Yep.
And once you understand that, yeah, it helps. Now, what Bradford Walker is saying is that the religion needs to institutionalize the raising of boys into men, girls into women, and train them for their roles as adults, working within the whole of an extended family, is absolutely true. It kind of goes with part six. It promotes families above personal gain, but honestly, that's a good enough point that it might even be enough for its own point on the religion chart.
Yep.
Plus, that gives us a neat symbolic seven.
It does. Uh,
So
yeah.
perfect.
All right, you got me. Anyway, it's a fantastic point. There's also another layer to this where, actually, I'm not quite there yet, where there are multiple levels to man: the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and so on and so forth in different ways. Religion provides another layer of order upon the order of the physical world we're already doing to create Trumptonshire. At no point is religion not useful for the purposes of this thought experiment. Moving on to the right needs vision. So this is something I've come across time and time again, especially once the newness of being alt-right or whatever has worn off. I don't need, like I mentioned earlier in the stream or to people in person, it kind of all merges together. But I don't need another zinger. I don't need another gotcha libs. I don't need another Richard Spencer CIA agent or FBI or whatever he was, espousing, of all things, Duginism, which is for Russians by Russians and only understood when you've soaked your liver in vodka. And then I'm told it makes perfect sense. And among other things like that, I'm being a little facetious, but I'm being very clear here. that I am absolutely tired of the grifters, and I'm absolutely tired of people who talk and talk and talk and don't do nearly enough with what they have, or decide that a meme is more important than their reputation. And I'm looking at you, Sargon of Akkad. And if seriously, these people who are running for political office, I understand, I absolutely agree, but guess what? Making these different things that you did in the past are going to be brought up to destroy you. And while it did not destroy them as permanently as the left would like, it was still incredibly frustrating to watch. So the right needs vision. And I mean, it needs the example of things to come. It needs something to aim for, to look at, to say, this is what we must require to be a community. Would it be a farming community? It would be rural. Bradford Walker says Brian Niemeyer consistently nails the need for a strong moral vision, and the right is lacking one as much as I am sympathetic to the dissonance. Yes. Self-sustaining. I would call it rural. Sargani is a good guy. Sargon's pretty okay, but like there are times when it's like, are you doing this for the meme or the grift, or do you mean this? And I have just stopped paying attention to whatever he's doing because I can't
So,
tell.
yeah, like this is kind of my problem with people like what's his name, Crowder, uh, like the Own the Libs college, those Own the Libs college videos. Now, granted, I understand it's comedy. However, like I just find apps, and I know people who do find them funny, and if you find it funny, it's supposed to be funny, so whatever, that's
Yeah,
okay.
we're not
You do
calling
you.
people immoral for
But
this.
right, but with that said, me personally, I just find no value in it because number one, you're seeing it's so heavily edited. You have absolutely no idea how many people he actually had to approach, nor do you know. And number two, you have absolutely no idea like how he could have selectively worded things, at what point in the conversation it was recorded, how tired the person was who was answering, if they just forgot what they were saying. So I'm like, I don't even know what I'm watching. Like why are we even doing this? Well,
Yep.
because it's funny and it owns the libs. Okay, great. But what are you accomplishing? I get that you're accomplishing humor and there are people who find it funny, but there's something too artificial about it to me that I can't mentally connect with it. I just watch him humiliating some poor college student, and I'm going, okay, so a college student doesn't know, like for example, when people go, "Are you against women's suffrage?" in a very solemn voice, and it's supposed to be a very sly wink, wink, like God, they don't even know what suffrage means. Go, okay, it's a word that's not very commonly used nowadays. That you clearly said in a way that made it sound like suffering, so they probably misheard you, or they were going off of context clues because, they didn't really hear the word that much because we don't use it anymore. And then they said something that was dumb. It just feels mean. That's my mini rant.
Yep. Like, beating on people who can't even determine, what their identity is, it has a certain amount of entertainment, but honestly, the fun has gone out of it for me. I want to build. I want to join people
Yeah,
who also want to build. I am building the superversive ideas. I am building, Pinkerton's Ghosts. I'm building novels. I'm building art. I am connecting with Bradford Walker and Brian Niemeyer and all these other guys. And I'm not going to claim to be this perfect saint. I'm probably very annoying in some circumstances. But it's not about that. It's about creating things with as many people as possible to promote and cross promote. My doors are always open to Brian Niemeyer and Bradford Walker and other people. Uh, and it just kind of, it's not about the logic of it or them paying me or anything like that. It is specifically about promoting like-minded individuals to create something like a society. Um, let's see here. Some comments. Bradford Walker says, "What should be emphasized is the need to build parallel structures to Globo Homo, so we can exit it. The dissonance in the UK and Europe. I got that memo, and are slowly probably got the memo, and they're slowly getting it." Yes, absolutely. The problem is that trying to start your own currency tends to get leaders and people killed. Megabuster Shep says, "A leaf," because I believe Crowder is Canadian. Avalok has been memeing on Sargon of Akkad, and he says Ben Shapiro is the worst. He endorses every leftist premise. Absolutely right. Slippery slope fallacy is real. It is not a fallacy. It is a legitimate argument against anything. Cordell wants to live in a Kurganite city-state as a plumber for the Grand Aqueducts. I hope he has a good health insurance plan for that. Shapiro is a nationalist. He's just a Jewish nationalist pretending to be an American. Once that clicks, it all makes sense. Absolutely right. Thank you, Anthony. So I'll go over the slides. While it is almost... so Ben Shapiro endorses every leftist objective, but not the methods. Sure, whatever gets him there.
Well, he does because he does for America, but he doesn't for Israel.
Absolutely. So, while it is almost a utopia, Trumptonshire is important as a modern vision of how society can be maintained. When I was a kid, I happened to come across a study of utopian attempts pre-1900, give or take. And essentially, it was an excuse to have as much sex as the people could get. Everything in common, socialist utopia, communist paradise, blah, blah, blah. Robert Heinlein would be proud. But they all failed partially because they were obsessed with sex rather than farming, but also because the money ran out and the rich person that they had left them, which is the normal behavior. In the modern era, which is completely different from anything in those utopias, we have to know what systems could theoretically work. If I start a commune, quote unquote, a county, I'm going to call it a county, not a commune. If I start a county of Trumptonshire with, 20,000 men, women, and children, here, there, everywhere, and we set it up and organize it, let's say that we discover that the currency issue doesn't work, or that it's impossible to maintain a censored internet. Well, that means that we can change things up. But we have the basis. What is this loaf of bread is supposed to look like? We throw it into the oven. Oh, it deflated. It needed to, I don't know, raise more. Whatever the thing is, we can experiment with it. And because of how it's set up to be self-sufficient, nobody's going to starve to death while we try to make it work. You take that, communists. Choice has ruined us, and it has given us nothing for what we have paid for. As freedom continues to death spiral, those with the least vision will fail first. Eventually, little Ben, Chicken Hawk, the littlest Chicken Hawk, that's what Vox calls him, is going to fly away to Israel just before shit hits the fan. How it'll look like, I don't know. I'm going to be here in America. I tell people that if the St. Louis burns down again, I'm probably going to die. The goal is to get some out of here, get out of the riot zones. But it's a whole bunch of things. If I know what my escape plan is, I have so much of a higher chance of success than not. With Choice for America, ultimately it has given us nothing. I keep coming back to it. My ability to have a choice has given me nothing. I'm still in the same place I am. I left college. I still have the same issues I had.
They there?
Was that?
Oh. Wait, why
No, nothing. My brother just showed up.
Wait a minute, don't you let
You
me
can
roll?
ignore me.
Okay.
You can ignore it.
Okay.
I'll tell him that.
Okay.
That we're streaming.
Yes. As our freedom disappears, not even with Joe Biden, before it, way before it, with George W. Bush and 9/11 at the least, ultimately these conservative bros, these comedians, these internet talking heads will disappear or turn coats. That's it. That's the only two options they have. Whether or not they're an agent of some foreign power or Mossad or any of these other things, FBI, CIA, they will show their true colors when it's come time to pay the piper. It doesn't matter what Nick Fuentes says or how his Gen Z GOP stuff pans out. He is saying things that will get him lined up against the wall, just like me, just like all these other people who actually have beliefs to fight for. And while he says some of the good stuff, there's still that need to fight to have that vision. The same goes for Sargon. The same goes for who's that mad lad who taught his dog to salute, give the eagle salute, etc., etc. Bradford Walker says, Minneapolis still burned, I'm still here. Already burned, I'm still here. Absolutely. Chad, that you are. And so on and so forth. Our heroes will, quote-unquote heroes, will disappear. We must become heroic. We must become the strong men with vision to create things. And I am willing to work with people who aren't obvious federal agents. While God provides us a vision of how people should live, he does not provide a model for how the people, societies, acts. Now, that might seem strange as he has laws in place. He has certain things that he covers, especially for our interaction with our Christian brothers. However, I do not view that as the same model as what Trumpton Shire is. And I don't really have much else to say about it. Like, we need the model city, even as we have the model human. If we become model humans and band together, we have the model city, but we still need those techniques for the modern world. You have anything to got for me, Anthony?
No, except I agree. I successfully managed to convince my brother it would probably be a good idea if he just left the room for now. So here I am.
I'll bully him too. So the Bible's relationship to Trumpton Shire is in 3 points. The Bible provides morals, guidance, and hope beyond life. And I don't say it, but it's for the common person. At no point does it provide a blueprint for a society-wide movement, except it does say, obey Caesar. Unfortunately, I don't really view Trumpton Shire as being able to survive without an uber government somewhere, benign, not bothering with it because it pays its taxes. But
yes, I will note here, there is one other, that's actually a good segue, because, so there is one other person I know of who has tried to come up with a project sort of like this. And that person, and you are going, once I say it, you're going to nod and go, yes. Stefan Molyneux.
Molyneux?
Molyneux, yes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. I've never heard it said out loud.
Just call him Saint.
Yeah. So, when he wrote a book, I was recommended it by, actually by Zach Klug the Great, who I know was a fan of him. He recommended the book, and I, with all due respect to Molyneux, who I'm sure is a very smart guy, to Saint Yifan, I found the book absolutely awful, like embarrassingly bad. He posits his theory is that we should have no government at all. Literally no government. Like, he is an anarchist, a straight up anarchist. And his argument is that government has never led to anything good, that anything that the government provides, private industry can and will do better. And I found the book extremely poorly argued and unconvincing. However, I will give Molyneux credit. He, at the very least, did provide a model for the sort of society that he would want to create, how it would look. But I found it wildly impractical to the point of being historically illiterate.
I haven't read this one. I don't. That sounds like something he did.
I can't remember the name of the book. If I did, I would tell you. But
yep. There is another one, Victoria, which is being sold by Castalia House, which actually hits pretty well close to this, which I actually should link in.
I thought Victoria was fictional, though.
Yes, you're right, but it's a model in the sense of that. There are other fictional models. Another Christian one is unfortunately Brigade, but I'm going to talk about that in a bit. Not that it's a bad book.
I mean, if you want to, if we're going to look at fictional models, I mean, Robert Heinlein has multiple. That was,
Heinlein,
you know, he
it's
has
an excuse for him to have sex. It's not. He's part of the problem.
No, it's also in Starship Troopers, though. He gives an idea for what his, you know, a type of society.
Sure.
Heinlein's thing seemed to be less that he was pushing any specific view of society, as he had lots of different ideas just because he thought that the version that we had now didn't work. So I don't know if it's completely fair to, like, look at Starship Troopers and go, that's the world Heinlein would have wanted. It's not that so much as, here is an idea for another way that we could run things different than what we're doing now. You know, and here are reasons that such a world could work. In fact, Starship Troopers, that's arguably, like, pretty much the entire book.
I do not find Starship Troopers as realistic as everyone else does. Nor do I find.
I don't find it realistic, but I find it interesting.
See, for me, it's I want an element of realism to it, but we'll continue. The Council of Autocrats. You mean Autobots? The king has godly moral and standards applied to him, but he is still a man and doesn't overcome his sin issues without assistance. Priest types are required to guide him as they do the peasant. Essentially, the king is a man, the mayor is a man, and I use the king in a metaphorical sense, not in a literal sense. There is no king in Trumptonshire, it has a mayor. But the mayor must have somebody he can confide in when a question comes up, who is wise and, and is secretive, reasonable. A confessor, he needs a confessor. Or in the Protestant sense, he needs a pastor he can talk to. Not somebody in authority over him, but can provide spiritual guidance.
So, one thing about the whole Mayor King issue and the whole issue of governance, here is one of the reasons, like, where I kind of fall apart with some of the right. You know, specifically the biggest standard bearer for this sort of position of, like, of republicanism versus monarchy is John C. Wright. One of the places that I fall apart with him actually comes from what you said. You just said that Trumptonshire has no king, it has a mayor. This is true. However, Thomas Aquinas, if he were writing about Trumptonshire, he would consider the mayor a form of king. Sure. And he would also consider the current U.S. president a form of king. So, I hear things like, in the Republic, we are not subjects, we are citizens who have an equal share in the government, and I'm like, the government works the same way that it works under any other system. It's just that the way that we decide on who is in charge is different. You know, all we're doing is figuring out what the best way of organizing things. Call them citizens, call them subjects. I am subject to the current U.S. government, whether I like it or not, and I don't like it currently. But I am their subject. I must listen. It does not matter if I voted for a different person or not. That's why Thomas Aquinas, you know, like John C. Wright goes on the whole philosophical difference between presidents and kings. But Thomas Aquinas would have just said it's just a variety of king. There's such a thing as a king who is not hierarchically, you know, who is not hereditarily elected. Yep. Like, there are all sorts of ways kings were chosen throughout history. And the president has the powers that he would associate with a certain variety of elected king. So these philosophical differences are all, like, well and good. But at the same time, you know, I would absolutely argue that I think that these sorts of hair-splitting discussions miss the point.
Yep.
And they also get into, like, you know, should we have a king or not have a king? Well, all government is the organizing principle of the ruling body, right?
Yep.
Like, right now, the rule, the American system, I think, was a good experiment to attempt. Yeah, and I have great respect for George Washington, who seemed to genuinely believe in it. I have actually met, not met, I've read people, I should say, who believe that Washington should have accepted the invitation that he got to become the king. Which is, and while I understand such sentiments, I get why they would say that. It would also have diminished the character of Washington, who was a great man because he was a true believer in his cause.
Yep.
If he was not a true believer in his cause, then he wouldn't be worthy to be king anyway, and he wouldn't be as great of a man.
Yep. It would have.
So
it would have tainted his
yeah,
reputation.
go ahead.
It would have. All I was saying is that it would have tainted his reputation. Yep.
So it's just this whole thing. Like I view the purpose of government, I think, a lot less romantically, and part of that comes from I don't buy into all of the the American Revolutionary myths. Like how did we beat the strongest army in the world? Well, it's really not that much of a mystery. We didn't really beat them. We outlasted them because we were overseas and we were defending our home turf and we were too much trouble for them to bother eventually.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the reason. Like, it's, like, I hear, like, it's a miracle that we did it. And, on one hand, yes, during the 10 dark days in New Jersey, I just did a Pinkerton's Ghost on this, it was. But on the other hand, it's also like once you survive past the most difficult point, it's advantage America. It's like they had to make it past that point. Because then it just becomes more trouble than it's worth. And that's exactly what happened. It's the same reason we lost Vietnam, but I would not attribute that to divine intervention. I would attribute it to Vietnam was not worth our time.
Yep.
Like, I'm not going to make a big commentary on it because I haven't researched Vietnam.
And
so I don't even know if,
either,
like...
But,
Yeah. But, like, I've heard, we shouldn't have gone to Vietnam in the first place. Well, I'm not going to say that because I don't know enough about it to say for sure. That's the common wisdom, but as you and I both know, the common wisdom is often dumb and stupid. So that means nothing to me. I just don't know enough about it. Maybe we should have been in Vietnam, but even if we should have, the reason that we left was just because it became more trouble than it was worth. And that's the exact same reason that we beat Britain. Now, one is divine intervention and one isn't. I don't know. We won a war, we got a government.
Moving on.
I look at it with a lot less romanticism than other people.
People agree with your statement on the mayor and king. I only use the term mayor to keep me in continuity with academic agents' statement and video.
Right, and I think it's a fine term, and I get why you would use it too, because this is small scale, and you don't want to confuse people. But historically too, it's not necessary. It's not necessary either. Like, for example, in like the Middle Ages, there were princes of small towns.
Yep. So, Megabuster
So call
Shepherd.
it what you want, kind of.
Yeah. Megabuster Shepherd says God raises up nations and Satan tears them down, only for God to build them back up again. White Pill. Even though the current political entity is on its last legs, God will save the American people. And he protects his flock. Absolutely. We cannot count God out for whatever's going on. And honestly, revival comes at times of the lowest of lows. And with the leaders starting to come up and shake off their shackles, conquer their addictions, master their appetites, I'm looking forward to things. There are two major events within a Trumpton Shire's life. Shire Reeves, I guess, life. First is birth. People will want to have children and life in peace, but not degeneracy. There would be an uptick in the birth of children compared to the modern world. I should have added compared to the modern world, whatever. And there's a little bit something about this. People saying, people are going to explosively grow. That's maybe true for the first generation. It is not true for the other generations. Once stability is achieved.
Well, the Amish and the Mennonites are growing explosively at the moment.
Incest is growing explosively for them at the moment. Uh,
Still, it's the same basic idea, though, honestly.
yes. I'm more saying that in general things will normalize over time. One of the things I'm going to do with an American style model is that there needs to be a frontier to handle things, and to provide opportunities for people out there other than, oh, here you are in the globe. So what do I do with myself? And walks off. Like, we're trying to avoid that, but that's something else entirely. Next is a priest class must exist to train children for the life and spirit beyond the spirit of their parents. What I mean by that is that essentially, even though the children will be trained by their parents, there must be a class of people who understand, know, appreciate, love, desire to spread the spirit in which they were born into, or support, or whatever words you want to put into this. It's without a teacher's priest class, and I would say a priest class more than a teaching class, educator class. There's no way for them to say, "Why do I love God?" Oh, well, he died for our sins. Well, if they have deeper questions than that, you have to have somebody who can answer them. And in Protestant spheres, it's supposed to be the parents as much as the pastor. But in the absence of parental knowledge, there must be a more moral authority who understands the technical details and can communicate the technical details. Lastly, Trumpton Shire is a sort of God to the people in the absence of God Almighty. A priest class is inevitable as religion, chosen by the majority or otherwise. So the second thing that a priest would preside over would be death. Lastly, Trumpton Shire must have priests to handle funerals, cemeteries, and other such functions. While it is easy to say that the family may deal with the funeral, not all ground, as in cemetery ground, circumstances, or people are capable of burying their dead ex nihilo, whether a slow death of a loved patriarch or the sudden death of a young man in an industrial accident. Not everyone is capable of burying their dead unassisted. Every death in Trumptonshire would be a greater blow than the death in the modern world, as life that they depend on for part of their personal peace is disrupted. Let's see. I gotta make sure he isn't.
I really don't have anything to add. I agree with all of that.
Awesome. So, we'll move on then, just because I don't have anything. I'll say some comments real quick. Just look at Russia and France. How many times have they been erased only to come back roaring? Bradford Walker says, I suggest any such project, as in Trumptonshire, focus on a founding on a series of extended family homesteads and build out from there. Extended families are the default social, political, and economic unit. In other words, the tribe. Anthony says, hot take. Russia was erased and has been something spiritually different from its predecessor nation since Lenin. Bradford Walker says a successful Trumptonshire will center itself around a local church that promotes stability via religion as an independent actor, not as tied to the local families by blood. Absolutely, blood corrupts churches. And I mean familial blood. This makes the church the network, connecting such Trumptonshires together into a decentralized nation, making the model into a fractal structure. Yeah, actually, that's really close to the model I have been working on for the American system I'm talking about. Holy Roman Empire, Anthony says. Megabuster Shepherd replies to Anthony and says, yes, but the Orthodox Church, the heart of the Russian people, survived and is growing. Outside of Christian circles, everyone considers Orthodox priests a KGB agent. Like if like I've spoken to people in the intelligence agencies, retired, but they, we were discussing, oh yeah, Orthodox stuff, it's still there in Russia. Oh yeah, but like back in the day, if you received anything from a Holy Orthodox church, you had to check it for bugs. Is it a relic in your hand or a microphone, etc., etc.
That's hilarious.
So here's a series of slides on creating the priests. We're a couple slides from being done. 5 slides. Likely one township or several townships. That is to say, several Trumpton shires are not enough to handle the needs of a people. Several Trumpton shires may crop up over an area. Let us say that the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is entirely Trumpton Shire territory. And we don't mean one Trumpton Shire, we mean the example of Trumpton Shire in each its own little self-sufficient area. They may ally for certain purposes: defense, health, healthy competition in sports, that is, to allow a healthy outlet for men's enthusiasm; need fulfilling, that is to say, if there is a shortage of X, they can provide X; and higher education for jobs that require hard sciences, like certain engineering specialties. I know that apprenticeship can cover a lot. However, try to explain nuclear physics to an apprentice. I have seen examples of it. I do not believe that something beyond carpentry, woodworking, metalworking, blacksmithing can survive at the nuclear engineering tier. And we can absolutely forget about space travel if we are only apprentices. That higher education would be maintained by elder priests who train their replacements, who follow a system like the mayor's, except that they are also given memorization tests and tutelage. So I'm going to explain something with the mayor's succession. The mayor, or the king, or whatever you want to call him, the prince, would be a man who is handpicked by his predecessor, who must be at least 50 years old and must have spent at least 20 years in gainful industry. That is to say, the mayor may choose Mr. Wackham the baker to be his replacement. Mr. Wackham has run the bakery for 30 years after the untimely flour explosion accident that slew his father. And he is now 51 years old, even as the previous mayor is 103 years old and sadly too infirm to complete his business. In other words, there would be several tiers to this. The first tier of priests would be at least 40 years old. I know this is going to raise some hackles, but I do not believe that the sterile priest environment, the unmarried priest environment of the Catholic Church fits as well while maintaining independence. However, I can reasonably believe that provided there is some oversight from the village fathers, that a Catholic unmarried priest may be chosen. Technically. Yeah, what's up? Go for it.
Here's the thing about the unmarried priesthood and the difference between, ye olden days and today. As anybody who has done the research into it will tell you, unmarried priesthood statistically is not a problem. That, in fact, if you go into the statistics of it in terms of degeneracy, technically you will find that it's actually lower among the unmarried priesthood as opposed to other places. With that said, and I've had this conversation with you where I said I don't let, not that I let the Catholic Church off the hook here. The issue is the cover-up, but that's another story. What I was trying to get at, though, is the difference between the priesthood, then, and when I say quote-unquote then, I mean like, Middle Ages then, and now, is respect. Dalrock used to say this, and he was absolutely right. There is one thing that men will want more than sex. Pretty much just one thing, consistently, that you will find as a pattern over and over again, and that is respect.
Yep.
The priest of a town was a respected figure.
Yep.
He was the moral center. he did something extremely important, he had prestige, much like a doctor. This is also why you get a lot of foreign priests, a lot of Filipino priests, because in the Philippines, becoming a priest is like saying, I'm going to become a doctor. You're going to get educated, and you're going to become a moral pillar in theory. That's the idea behind it. Once you lose that respect for the priesthood, then the incentive to become an unmarried priest drops like a rock. Why would you ever agree to become a priest if you don't have that respect? Because again, like as Dalrock used to say, that's the one thing that men will take above sex is respect. And that is now gone. If you brought that back, I think that an unmarried priesthood could work.
Absolutely. So this goes without saying that in this ordered society, the pastor, the priest, the so on, would be a very respected individual. You tip your hat to him as he passes, and he blesses you genially, and among other things, among his duties. He is there at every birth. He is there at every death, if possible. And if he was not there at the death, he's certainly there for the funeral. The system, though, I am talking about is that there must be a deep connection to the community. For example, in this case, for the Catholics especially, perhaps there is an apprenticeship with the priest, with an elder priest. That is to say, let us say that in the parish of St. Michael, there is a priest who is 50 years old. He sends out a request to the bishop, who looks fondly upon Trumpton Shire, and he is sent a 20-year-old firebrand. Uh, this man is brought before the village elders and examined for how he is. Let us say that this man it would invade hell with a water balloon, and he passes the inspection. The goal would be to have him meet and work with and experience as many of the people within the community that he has, within his parish, which is the right term for a Catholic area like that, what I'm describing. And
Yes.
he would essentially know everyone. While if the priest is there at every birth, death, and funeral, he is there alongside him, helping dig the tomb.
Right. Probably working as deacon as well.
Right. Like, at no point is he not laboring as the baker is, as the policeman is, and so on and so forth. He has as deep a connection with his community as the mayor does. And even though he inherits a little sooner than the mayor, because honestly, the priest needs, a very long time to do great work, he is still given those experiences that are required. If, say, for example, let us say that there's a sex scandal. There's a maid and she's suddenly pregnant and he's the father. Just throwing it out there. I'm not saying that this will happen.
Right.
There should be systems in place to say you are unacceptable. You must, defrock and marry this girl. Not even we are sending you away. It is you have lost your mandate from heaven to be a priest. You must now be an ironmonger or a firefighter or whatever. Even then, though, it might be worth expelling him and his maid bride. Like any number of things. I'm not going to specifically say, but something that has deep and lasting consequences for the priest must be there. The same with the pastor. In the pastor's sense, there would be a sort of council or conference that has no actual authority over the churches. However, is a way for pastors to meet and greet may be required. In this sense, because I do not believe the mayors should be completely immune or unconnected to the world outside. And in the same way, the priests, the pastors should be connected with one another to ensure that if there's a spiritual contagion, if there's a need, that they can make it. They can make it. I am not talking about ecumenicalism. I am not saying the churches should become one church. I am saying that to the parishes and the churches and the so on, and the people who worship in their own homes and blah, 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 home churches, that there is a system in place to ensure the training and community connection of these priests, pastors, and so on, that are as strict as the mayor's requirements. Even though he isn't a baker, he should at least spend a few days every month, chatting with the bakers or the ironmongers or whatever the town happens to have. Let's see here. The idea of a higher education. Let us say that the bishop sends us 5 men for the 5 parishes of the county. They would have a quasi higher education. This higher education is specific and designed to fulfill the specific needs of the community. In other words, what are the main pastors concerned about for the people around him? It is not specifically a paid position. In other words, no one is being paid to help these men memorize, study, and educate themselves on the Bible. It is entirely at your own cost. So in other words, there is no professor class that can molder and fester. No professor class at all. It is a form of regimented apprenticeship. For example, let us say that the bishop actually resides within Trumpton Shire in the cathedral, one of the 3 Catholic parishes I mentioned earlier.
Right.
What's the term for a bishop? His Eminence? Is that what's his?
I think so. I'm not sure.
So,
Seems right.
So his Eminence, Dominic Masters, his Eminence, Mr. Masters, has these 3 priests, deacons, training under him, and he educates them in how they should comport themselves in this specific event. He has one-on-one with one of them, who is implied to take over from him in the sense of that if there is ever an emergency that requires a bishop, he would be able to step into that role, but not before one of the elder priests, should they want it. But honestly, humble men should not take it unless it is necessary. And the 2 replacements for the elder priests in their 2 other parishes. The pastors should be handled the same, though because of the fractious nature of Protestants, it should be more of a one-on-one or 1 to 3 sort of event. In other words, there is strict education and control for the priests as there is for the mayor. And I keep equating the priests and the mayor, the pastors, the priests, the whatever, because even though the mayor runs the physical, the mundane, the real world, the pastors, the priests, will have control over the spiritual. For example, forcing priests, as I discussed earlier, into labor for 20 years. In other words, they make the bread, they mong the iron, they, shoe the horses, they accompany the constable. For 20 years would make them a part of the community. That close examination and the dedicated study would prove the dedication and weed out the lazy, corrupt, and power mad. At least all but the smartest ones. Joel Osteen, and I have met others who wish they were Joel Osteen, including this one fellow who pastored a church I went to that I left, would not do this. They would not do this even for an instant. The second you said, you have to do physical labor, you have to wake up at 3 a.m. to help start baking the bread and the donuts for the workers who are coming. Well, no, just the bread. There would be a donut shop. So that their wives can make them breakfast and dinner and so on and so forth. They would look at you and go, huh? I have to do this for 20
actually,
years?
that's something that you just said in passing that made me think for a second. You need a matchmaking service.
Oh, absolutely. There would be a matchmaking service. I would also think that
I don't know exactly how it would work, and I don't know if it would need to be like an official one, but you need a system in place.
I agree with that. But the benefit of Christianity is that it promotes one woman for one man, and if you don't want to die a spinster and childless, you better start, going for the deltas. because this is essentially a town of deltas with a few bravos and alphas scattered all over the place, with the mayor at the top, who is taken from the ranks of
So,
deltas.
right, that's because those are the healthy versions of those are healthy people in the socio-sexual hierarchy.
Yep.
The lambda, omega, and gamma are all sick versions of that. Since we're talking about, in theory, a healthy community, then it will almost by definition be majority delta, because most people are deltas.
Yep. As for matchmaking, however, I firmly believe that it should be a mix of events, cotillions, or whatever they're called. Uh, Not like you can't force people to like
I
each
think
other.
families should have
Right.
a role in setting it up.
Yes.
Like, obviously, just almost definitionally, uh, the people involved have a say in it, right? I mean, in
Yes.
fact, that is something that is necessary that was like one of the revelations of Christianity. It wasn't completely unique to Christianity, but it was a big deal that if the woman didn't want to get married, then that literally invalidated the marriage. This
Yep.
was like a radical departure, you know.
Yep.
So I'm not saying that people are set up and then, you're betrothed for life and that's it. But what I'm saying is that the parents specifically, and the extended family needs to have a say in how things work. And it should not be, nowadays it would be considered something embarrassing. It should not be something embarrassing. It should be how it is done.
Yep. Bradford Walker makes an amazing point here. Uh, he actually makes several, and for some reason I missed the other ones, but here's the one that's really hitting me. One of the more useful functions of the church, uh, the pastor, the priests, would be to track lineages, the better to prevent inbreeding and promote legitimate reproduction. Um, let's see here. He talks about galactic Christendom. So waiting for that book, Bradford. You know I love you. You know I love you dearly, but I need the sequel. I need the sequel to Star Knight. Uh, Magabuster Shep says the Russian Orthodox Church has always been one with the state. They're inseparable. Secret police, famous Black Riders. Yeah. Bradford Walker says the function of higher education should be restored to the church. They are the best situated to handle all of the information needs of a people, both day-to-day and archival. I agree with archive. I do not agree entirely with that statement. Not because it is fundamentally wrong, but because we are not dealing with a mono church as the Catholic was. And even though Catholics do have their divisions, the Dominicans and the Franciscans and the SSPX and the whatever the heck is happening with the Pope these days, I don't even know anymore. It is not it is not the monolith it was in America. Sure, in a majority Catholic area where there's like say 5 Trumpton shires, and there's and it's big enough for an archbishop and so on and so forth. Um, His Excellency the Archbishop with two His Excellencies the bishops, uh, etc. etc. There would be we could do a different system for that. But even though the idea of Trumptonshire is English, I am trying to handle the American side of things as well as the English side of things, but landing on the American whenever there's a question. Um, I know that sounds probably weird and convoluted, but it's actually very important. I am an American. My mindset is American. I have Anthony with me, who is also an American. And, I claim a 400-year lineage from the founding of Maryland and before. And I don't do so lightly. It's at least 350 years if you want to be technical. But 400 years sounds.
I'm descended from Ellis Island immigrants from Italy.
Italians. But but like different situations for the area. I am describing the most generic possible thing with the most American slice of pie that is. Let's say that it is entirely high church Protestants and Catholics who are mostly the same type of Catholic. I could see them working together to create a high education system, for, say, dams and high level engineering and stuff like that that requires more than just apprenticeship. Uh, but that is outside the scope of what we're talking about today. I just agree that it could happen. We good, or do you
Yeah,
want to?
I would agree.
Yep.
No, I have no major disagree. I have no real disagreements with anything you just said.
So we're starting up the finishing of it, and I'm sort of going to put Trumpton Shire itself to rest. Number one, the maintenance of our modern order has been neglected by modern society and by its priest class. Number two, Trumpton Shire, to exist, must maintain a spiritual and religious priest class. 3. The priest class must preside over life in relation to stated goals, as in the stated goals of Trumpton Shire itself, birth, death, and its spiritual needs. Number 4. You cannot have a functioning society without a moral core that promotes pro-civilizational living. And that is to say, orderly, pro-life, all the things that one would consider orderly. Number 5, the moral core must be maintained over long periods of time by people invested in community while also being educated enough to know right from wrong. The average peasant or plebeian does not always know what is good for him. He must be educated and led to those good positions. People did not know how bad sugar was when things like the food pyramid came out. Now we do. Guess what? We still have to deal with that obesity epidemic. If there is somebody who can say it is spiritually bad of you to consume pornography, to cheat on your wife, and I'm just using sexual sin for this, but lying, cheating, stealing, you know, it can help guide people to keep Trumpton Shire running longer than it would normally. The goal is not to create the super ethno state of Christian Zion, and the techno music starts playing, etc., etc. The goal is to create a long-lasting, orderly society in the mode of the people that are within it. It is not enough to merely be good. We must pursue the benefits for our grandchildren beyond it. Anthony, do you have anything for the 5 points I put up here?
Uh, no, not really. I agree with it. As far as like Trumptonshire and this whole thing goes, I think that this is an excellent start to conversations that we need to have of the one other version of, the ideal society, the actual building aspect of it that I've seen. I found this much more convincing than St. Afon's version. That's what I'm going to call him. Than St. Afon's version of society, which I was extremely unconvinced by. This is not going to be something that can be made easily, but it is significantly more doable than like 95% of the utopian conservative societies that people bandy about. Like I said, I want talking to the people who try and start micronations. That's great. I don't even necessarily hate the idea. Like, if people are willing to follow you and you could be a king, but how are you doing this?
Yep.
This is also, there is certainly like a how are you doing this aspect to Trumptonshire, but at the very least, he's starting on the right path. Small.
Yep.
It's what you need to do. And I appreciate that he's having a real discussion about it. Like, no, really, like if we really will need to rebuild, then we need to have this conversation. Like,
Yep.
What should we do? How do we get started? How do we build this? So Megabuster Shepherd says we must take the Chinese view of history, the long term, shrug off the short term, embrace the long term. Yes and no. The Chinese view of history tends to lead to believing that, things like mass genocide is part of the cycle of history, so is excusable.
Yep.
and I am not on board for that. I
They,
get your point, though. I think you're thinking more of the cathedral view of history. The people who start building the cathedral are not the people who see it finished.
yep. I like that much more than the Chinese view. Because, like you said, the Chinese do justify genocide. The old joke in the history books is behold, the prince of Jin Xuan came down and wed the holy celestial princess, Mi Shan. There was a civil war, and 83 million Chinese people died. And it's not that's barely an exaggeration. You know, it's about growth more than long
Yeah.
term, like not growth. I'm
So
sorry,
that's
order.
the word. That's what I would use. I would call it the cathedral view of history. Specifically, I'm referring to the medieval cathedral. Nowadays, because of course of modern building methods, the metaphor breaks down because we can build cathedrals within a year,
Yep.
right? But in the medieval world, when they would make plans to build a cathedral, it was done with everybody who was starting the project knowing that they would not be alive to see it completed, and possibly their children would not be alive to see it completed. It could be 500 years before the final brick was put in the cathedral and it was actually finished.
Assuming no
But
wars.
right, but you start that project because you know that it's an important project, that it
Yep.
will be a good thing if it's done, and you believe in your vision enough that you believe that you believe in your vision enough that you believe that even without seeing the finished project, it will be worth it.
Yep.
We need to believe in our vision enough that even without seeing how things end up, we believe that what we're building is going to be worth the effort that we put in. Because the odds are very high that none of us are going to see Trumptonshire or anything like it. I use Trumptonshire as a metaphor in this case.
Right.
None of that. None of us are. The odds are very high that none of us here will live to see anything like it. However, what we can do, and what we are doing even on the stream in a way, is start to plant those seeds with the confidence that because we are doing this out of love of God and out of love of our children, out of love of the future, that we will give something beautiful and great to the world. But we need that vision. We need to see what it can be in our mind's eye, the cathedral view.
The
So
right.
Megabuster Shepherd says, should we also start a cathedral? The Catholics can. Anglicans can't. No, Anglicans can't. The Anglican Church is dead. Get wrecked.
Yes.
No.
Unironically, yes. Actually, they have so much corruption in it. It is easier for them to turn Catholic than it would be to fix all their issues.
They literally set up a system in the Catholic Church specifically for Anglican converts. Just friggin' join the Catholic Church. The Anglican Church is over. There's nothing.
Yep. So, the need for positive visions. As I've said multiple times throughout this presentation, owning the libs or setting up our own little echo chambers on Discord or whatever is currently the purpose of the right, and that needs to
Right.
change.
The purpose of the right is Stephen. The purpose of the right is to be Stephen Crowder, and I'm
Controlled
not saying that there's
opposition.
not. Yeah, not necessarily, not even just controlled opposition. That too, but I don't think Stephen Crowder is controlled opposition. At least I doubt it. I mean, anything's possible. What do I know? But you know, for all I know, he could be. But I don't think he is. But even if he's not, like Stephen Crowder doesn't really do anything.
So, yes, you're absolutely right. I just want to amend something I said earlier. Even though I said growth, I meant growth in the sense of building a orderly community, not growth as in profit and whatever the right happens to worship money wise at the time. Uh, just pointing out that Protestants have also built cathedrals, quite beautiful ones. Yeah, you're right. But, you know, the meme is Catholics built cathedrals. Uh, number two, we already know that what liberal and leftist utopias look like, and they are godless, soulless, and crueler than an Arabian seraglio. even if somebody says, oh, real communism never has been tried, we can still point to Stalin, to Hitler, to, even though he wasn't communist, he started as a communist, to...
Hitler wasn't communist, but he was a leftist, and I will not hear arguments otherwise.
Right? He was literally not extreme enough to survive as a leftist agitator. And so he turned to the right-wing militias that were forming from the soldiers that had survived World War One. Like, that's how he did it.
And then he implemented his left-wing program once he got into power.
Yep.
That's absolutely what he did. Again, this is... Yeah,
Anyway,
I won't hear argument for this.
There's too much to that. But basically, it's like we already know what it looks like. We cannot adopt their mindsets, language, or anything else about it. We need the language of Trumptonshire. We need the language of whatever I'm going to do with Branson, Jeff City, and Ozarkia. We need the language of whatever Catholic ultra ethno-state that Anthony comes up with. The Italians will win, and it is led by Il Duce's granddaughter, and so on and so forth. Number 3.
Oh man, that sounds like an anime to me. I don't know why. I'm not even sure why, but it does.
Anyway, number 3, to counter what I've described in 1 and 2, the right needs fiction with spoken and modeled ideas that answer questions the peasant and warrior classes, that is, the Alpha, Bravo, and Delta majority classes, have, like Trumptonshire. Most people do not have the imagination that the Superversives and certain other intellectual types have. Hey, Gebler, Carl. They do not have the imagination. They cannot, from whole cloth, create something. They can put things together in a way to make it, but that's not the same as saying, I have the match. If somebody were to say, Ben, I am doing such and such a thing, and I knew that they were good, honest, and true people, Christians, and I felt the moving of the Spirit of God, it would be one of those things where I reveal to them that, yes, I and others have preserved the sacred flames. I will give them to you without end. Merely ask, and it shall be given to you. It is our job to preserve, not to hoard. To create the knowledge necessary for others to create the real, not just to sit around and argue that because he didn't use this exact word, it is an inviolate, the idea is violated, essentially. Carl says, just found the stream, and I'm going to have to catch up. Oh, yes. But my goodness, owning the libs is such a low bar to clear. Gotta speak truth, not just complain about the cringe. Absolutely. We need truth. So I got 2 more slides. Do you have anything as we go into the final stretch, Anthony?
No, I agree with all of that. I think it's good that we've acknowledged that the Christian churches maybe shouldn't be in the same town as each other. I think that's important to acknowledge because, like, legitimately, right now we get along, but as soon as there is peace, we would not.
Nope. And I will actively seek it out because I will be bored.
Ben starts the anti-Catholic crusade.
Why? Boredom. And also, God wills it. That's more important. But, I was bored. Anyway, immunizing utopia. To conclude, whatever spiritual needs, and this is like the next tier, because there's one more tier above this. Whatever spiritual needs Trumptonshire must answer for, our spiritual needs within the right must also be met. Without those spiritual needs being met, which the ungodly left have, many times over, even if it's corrupted, they have it already. Anything may come into that soul space, anything from white supremacy, as in the destruction of everything that is Christendom as it applies to Europeans, and promotion of paganism in the destructive sense. Not, I am tired of this degeneracy and my parents didn't raise me Christian. I'm not talking about those pagans. I am specifically talking about people who worship the color of their skin over an almighty God, and other things like that. Not to insult people I know who happen to be that way. I'm just saying that there are greater and higher and more wonderful powers. To atheism, to false Christianity, that is to say, the churchians, the boomers, to whatever a large enough group of men desire most, and it is likely to offend God. And it goes without saying, but I will say it, that which offends God is on a timer to destruction. And maybe God will preserve his own. Sometimes he doesn't. Whether the free love libertarianism of the Freehold series by Michael Z. Williamson, who I've met and is a nice man, the banned white supremacy of Brigade, which is a very well written book, but it is no different than any of these other books here. The banality of Star Trek with its techno-utopia that leads to nothing but eternal war anyway. Or the Americanism of Victoria, which I linked earlier in the chat. Man's fetish, that is, his specific desire for a certain type of society in his own image, apart from God, will overcome the decent quiet of a good man. Good men must demand their mild, godly utopia, or be shouted down.
Yes. I have no disagreements.
So this is the last slide. God's end to all things. While God has allowed man to have free will enough to plunge the world into sin, God has also allowed man to know right from wrong. While he has not given us a model society, that is to say, to do with Trumptonshire as he has not done with Trumptonshire as we have done with Trumptonshire, he has given us the moral standards and heart to create a right-wing utopia. Mocking the good and holy makes one no better than a subversive. If academic agent's Trumptonshire is a castle of sand, and it happens to lack its chapel, it is still a good castle, and it is worth admiring, even if only he is the first, if only because he is the first to make his sand castle in the way that he has. The most important question we need to ask ourselves going from here is, would our model society please God?
Exactly. Yes. And again, that was actually like both of us agreed almost immediately. That was our biggest criticism of the original Trumptonshire as given to us by academic agent. And I think that it's not even particularly difficult to correct, and you've gotten an admirable way towards correcting it. Here is the thing. In practice, I guarantee that this model would not work as intended, because that's what models do. They don't work as intended when you put them into practice. But that does not mean that it's not worth trying, and this discussion is necessary. We need to be having it. We need to do more than just mock what's burning down or point out that it's burning down. We need to create. Create refers to art, but it also refers to governance. And that is where I'm glad that these sorts of projects have started to arise. Like I said, I mentioned this about the monarchist gentleman that I knew, quote unquote knew from online, that I know of, I guess is a better way to put it. I actually don't mock him. Like he was a real person in the sense, like, was he a LARPer? Yes, he was a LARPer in that no, he didn't have land or whatever, but he wasn't a LARPer in that, like, he was a veteran. He had a family. He had children. He was not a crazy, and he could argue his case very well. He also knew the limits of what he was trying to do. He was not a crazy person. I appreciate the project that he was attempting. With that said, I think that starting small is the only way to go, and also having the discussion before the implementation is very important, because I don't see what he was doing going anywhere. Trumptonshire, however, I can see being built within, say, 50 years.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And there are places within America and maybe some of the more remote places of England where it could happen.
Yes.
We're not here. We did not start this, and I hope he's listening here because, this is directly to him. We did not start this to kick sand in your face. We are here and we are helping
No,
you.
this is refining the project. This is not contradicting it.
Yep. And I also am saying this more as much for the people who are detractors who might have been attracted to here, because hey, some not as red as he should be idiot and his degenerate Italian friend who likes anime more than he does, is
But I don't. You've watched much more anime than me, and we learned last week.
and I have so many more names to put on the list. Laugh, look at the idiots and laugh. Mega Buster Chip says we need to build a castle. Yes. The Superversives are an art collective that wish to serve God. We wish to fight the subversion. We wish not only to put out the fires, but to hoard that which is sacred and create something from it that the generations we will never see may somehow touch and experience for themselves. We surely we have grown up in an age of poverty. I am turning 32 years old, and I can say that there have been times in my life where I've looked out into America and asked God, where are all the Christians who were meant to be my brothers and sisters? Not even in the sense of, oh, I'm lonely, I don't have a date. Oh, I'm this and that. A guy who is as close to me as a brother is a drug addict in California right now. Because, he abandoned Christ for a while. Supposedly he reads his Bible every day. But he's a toasted out druggie. Who knows? We cannot allow this to continue without fighting it. Without saying we will build our castle. And if some alpha, with his warband, assless chaps open to the radiated breeze to show how virile he is, shows up and he sees me and Anthony in the ruins of St. Louis, repairing a book, and he asks us, what do you do? Why should I spare you? Our answer isn't going to be, oh, you should spare our lives because our lives are sacred. Our answer is going to be, we will give you the powers of the old world that God has allowed us to preserve. The spirit, the ideas, how to build this city anew, how to make your immortal, make your will, your desire for the people immortal, more than just some dude who is raping the wasteland like everyone else is, but as somebody who built where there was nothing, even though he would not see it happen. And maybe he kills us because it wasn't the right time. Or maybe he says, I would be immortalized and there would be statues and I will be great and I will have a city after me and I will have my children rule it for all generations and you can give me this? Behold, here's Trumptonshire. Behold, here's how you handle water purity. Here's a book on radiation sickness and diseases. Here's a book on eugenics. Here's a book on, handling, rebuilding from a wasteland. Here's all of David the Good's, manuals like compost or die. Whatever it is, whatever's in our hands to give, it is God's will for us to give it. And to give it without asking for anything in return. Don't get me wrong, we're going to sell books, and we're going to have a Kickstarter for Pinkerton's Ghosts, and we're going to have all these other things. But when it comes down to the knowledge, the ability, the sacred fire that we have been entrusted in, the muse, the spirit, the Bible, the knowledge, everything we have, we cannot be stingy with it in an age of poverty. Otherwise, we're just as bad as the subversives. Worse, because after they burned everything down, we said, at least I've got mine, and walked off into nothingness. Anthony, I'm going to end it here. or at least a serious part of our discussion.
Very well.
Unless
So,
unless you have something to say, that's specific.
no, I prefer the cathedral metaphor more than anything else because
Absolutely.
I think I did not come up with it. By the way, I've read it before. I can't remember from where. I know that Joseph Moore, who is just literally just a random Catholic guy with a blog, has used it, but I don't think that he came up with it either. If I can find the origin, then I would give them credit. But besides that, I like the cathedral metaphor, particularly in this case. News for
Absolutely.
you guys, though. Next week, it's my show.
Yep.
Yay! Ben will be on break. In fact, he will probably be in Chincoteague and or driving a long distance to and from various locations.
1,000 miles, barely
Yep.
a journey.
Exactly. So it's up to me to control the live stream. I don't know. I know. I'm actually not 100% sure what I'm doing. I've been feeling out potential guests. There is a non-zero chance. I was going to say the name, but I won't because I don't know if they'll do it. There is a non-zero chance that I'll get some people. That there are certain people who have a little bit of clout in the community may be on the show with me. However, if I end up not getting anybody, I don't want to use the word interesting because that sounds mean. If I don't end up getting anybody who has something specific to talk about, that's a better way to put it. Then I think that next week will be about why anime is my pulp revolution. It is something that's specific to me that really doesn't work with Ben, so it's perfect for the Benless live stream.
Degeneracy after I've built up so much. Degeneracy.
So the serious reason that I think that would actually be kind of a fun discussion to have is because when I wrote an article on that for Castalia House like a year and a half ago, maybe even 2 years ago, whatever, something like that, I learned later, I didn't even know at the time, but I figured out later that it actually started making its rounds among the Pulp Rev guys and who were like nicely mocking it. They were. I was both amused and also mildly annoyed at it because I'm like, I didn't even say anything bad about Pulp. Why are you even causing why are you even doing this? But they were like, I've always thought there was kind of an elitist attitude among some of the Pulp Rev guys. I don't fully believe that anymore. However, I would like to explore that topic and what I mean when I say that, because I stand by that even today. Anime is my pulp revolution in a very specific way. That might be what next week is about, unless I get a guest who has something specific to talk about. If I do, then you'll know, and the conversation will be interesting. Otherwise, I will have another guest on. It might be the author April Freeman, or A.M. Freeman. I mean, sorry, she uses her initials for her author name. It might be the author A.M. Freeman. It might be Ken Dickinson, my partner, one of the partners in crime at Pinkerton's Ghosts. Or it might be somebody else, maybe David Hallquist, who is regular Pinkerton's Ghost contributor as well. We'll see. I don't know yet.
He's probably one of the best noir storytellers in the new blood sort of genre. Not an established name. So, anytime you see his name on Amazon or whatever, definitely check him out.
Yes.
I'm linking Pinkerton's Ghost below for those people still here and wondering what it's about. We are two-pronged. We do the live streams where half the time, well, 3/4 of the time, we talk about whatever we want, and another quarter of the time, which is going to increase in the future, we are going to be talking about serious stuff like this. If you're down for the ride, subscribe and tell us some ideas and stuff like that in the comments. I will at least look at them, even if I do.
Also, I'm going to say this. You guys need to get ready for it because it's happening. We're going to have a JoJo stream soon. We have to. There's too much JoJo going on. It's going to explode. We're going to explode.
Oh
What's
my
that?
goodness.
Fooly cooly? Is that fooly cooly? No, but Jojolian is ending, and like Ben and I both, honestly, at this point have been like dying to talk about Jojolian on stream, but we've both been holding off because it's ending in like a week,
Yep.
a little bit over a week.
Whenever the next chapter is in common distribution, we will schedule a JoJo stream. So if you don't want to hear about that, you can avoid it. We will not torture you.
On the other hand, you will want to hear it because our JoJo commentary is top notch.
It actually is. We are the secret unsung heroes of JoJo intellectualism.
And Bradford Walker said, with the recent JoJo announcements, I am not surprised. Yes, Ifaruz is my waifu. You can't have her; she's mine.
Degenerates.
No, in all seriousness, Ifaruz on the live stream was like
she was adorable.
She was like engineered in a lab to do the JoJo live stream. It was actually kind of crazy.
A secret World War II leftover lab to destroy the Americans, but it didn't last long enough.
Like it was, she was on there, like she was making Part 7 references, like she knew her stuff. She's throwing out. They showed there was this moment where they show a picture of Jolene and the Joe Bros. Apparently, I thought I had seen it, though maybe it just looked like a still from the manga and I hadn't. But they show a picture of it, and you could hear I in the background literally like gasp, and they like cut to her. She goes, "I'm sorry, it's just the first time I've seen it in color," and I'm like, "Yeah, she's like the fan base is gonna eat her up," which they already have, by the way. Ifaruz is already incredibly popular, and how could she not be? She was more into it than the director was.
Anyway, so like, you know, we're gonna have some fun over the next few weeks, but to counter that, I am going to put up videos. Maybe not this week because of my trip, but I will be putting up videos about the ideas presented in Trumptonshire, and I will be sort of modeling it for an American style and spirit. Like I said during the thing, you know, Trumptonshire is very English. What would the American version look like? How could Americans do it as best they can? We'll talk about that later, as well as challenges facing American right-wing and white communities, especially in rural areas. Not all rural areas are created equal. But, you know, that's sad talk for some other time. Next week, Anthony takes the helm. The week after, maybe it's another Anthony week. I don't know. Maybe I'll put him on the spot just to do it. Or maybe I will be back.
I'll have fun with it. I'll prove that you've just been holding me back all this time.
Oh, is that right? Anglo is holding the Italian back. Where have I heard that before? And so on and so forth. All right, guys. Thank you for joining. This has been our most successful stream ever. A big thank you to Academic Agent if you are listening. A big thank you to our new listeners. I know that it's kind of a whiplash being in the Superversive community where we will alternately preach against degeneracy and then gush over JoJo. But I guarantee you...
JoJo's not degenerate.
It isn't. But I guarantee you there's more method to our... What's the... is he mad or well-advised? There we go. I got a Shakespeare reference from King Lear right. It counts. I'm
beautiful.
1 for 2. Thank you all for joining us.
Whoa, the top chat just jumped to 13 on my phone, meaning it was probably there all along and my phone wasn't up to date, but whatever.
Woo.
Nice.
Have a good night, guys.